boy Montoya Smith, aka Black Socrates. All I ask is that you think.
What's up, everybody? It's your boy Montoya Smith, aka Black Socrates, and welcome to the Just My 3 Cents podcast. Glad to be with you after some technical difficulties last week. Wasn't able to complete the show. For those who were watching last week, cut off in the middle of the broadcast. So I don't know if people are gonna have faith that we're here this week. I typically do these on Wednesday nights. Sometimes I have to move to Thursdays based on my schedule. So again, just trying to build up the page. If you're out there, if you find this worthy of listening to, if you will, please, if you will, share the broadcast and subscribe to the page. I always forget to say that. So I'm gonna jump right in, assuming that people will catch it later, which most of my people do. And like I said, since I'm not a regular time, and then after what happened last week, I'm not surprised to see. I would say I'll wait for people to come on, but I just started promoting it not too long ago. So I'm just gonna jump right in, and hopefully when you catch this later, we'll get right on topic. So basically, I changed the format a couple of weeks ago, whereas I was promoting a specific topic. I want to go to more where I'm doing these open call discussions on race, sex, and culture, which you saw in the advertisement is what we focus on. And so jump on some of the hot button issues that are happening in social media and currently, if you will. And then I do have a discussion I would like to bring to the table. A lot of times it's an extension of, as you see behind my head, the Mental Dialogue Talk Show that we do every Saturday morning, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we also do deep dives, if you will, on race, sex, culture, and Black business. On the Just My 3 Cents podcast here tonight, it's kind of, we start out with some quick hitters and then we'll do a deep dive. So the first quick hitter that I want to start on, let me say this, I do see people jumping on right now. You are allowed to join this podcast with me. So you should see a link, whether you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, or the Mental Dialogue Facebook page. You should see a link in which you can join the podcast, and we basically can mental chess box on any issues of race, sex, and culture. You can bring the issue or you can discuss the one that I'm discussing. But the quick hitters I want to start with right now is, what is it? What they call it? Put on your shoes TikTok that's going around, right? If you've seen, I'm pretty sure you've seen a couple of them and probably found a few of them quite humorous. And if you don't know, that's the TikTok that's floating around. I've seen it on IG, maybe on Facebook once, but I've seen it mostly on IG. The TikTok thing where the parent basically runs into the room and tells their little child, and I've seen it done for various ages, that hey, that and all I've seen is women doing it. I don't think I've seen any men do it, at least the ones I've seen. And so the mother says, hey, this other child's mother is coming to fight me, and she says she's bringing her kids, and so she's literally challenging her kids. Are you going to come out and fight their kids? Says, I have to fight the mother. Put your shoes on, or you going to back me up and fight just in case the little kids, the other parents' kids jump in or whatever. And it's basically done to see the hilarious reaction to whether their child is going to be willing to fight for them or whatever. And you've seen all these different reactions. I've only been able to watch maybe two to four. I think I've seen about 4 of them or whatever. And be honest with you, I was turned off by the first one. And I'm sitting here going, while I understand it's just a joke, right? And social media can obviously be used for our entertainment. And there's all these things, these little challenges that you will, if you remember, one of the craziest one of all, and I think of all, was the crate challenge, where people were really risking injuring themselves in order to perform on social media. So huge risk. In my opinion, one of the silliest challenges I've seen. But I was, just wanted to add my 3 cents to the one with these children, that I was a little disturbed that this is the one that's going on. And one of my good friends, Terry Simmons, is to bring that brother up. He put out a post today that I 100% agree with. He said something to stop the put on your shoes challenge, hashtag, not hashtag, but dash management. And I wholeheartedly agree with it, because here's why it disturbed me. And again, this is just me giving my 3 cents. Is because, as in a sense, as funny as it can be, I am not. I don't like highlighting the idea that we will even, although we're pretending, that we will play to our children to pretend that we as adults are going to handle an altercation via physical violence. And this is not me being soft about it. I'm talking about just the concept that as adults, that there is a willingness to challenge our kids to see what they do, to kind of have them process this moment. And you're explaining, hey, I'm about to get in a fight. Do you got my back? Will you fight with me? Is in my opinion, not worth the entertainment. It's not worth the entertainment. You don't have to agree with me. You jump on with me if you will, but that's not worth the, people can say, yeah, it's just a joke. But for me, it is highlighting, in my opinion, the idea that our community, to a degree, can, again, I know we're playing, but to a degree that we're being emotional to the point where we're encouraging our kids via us as adults handling an altercation physically. While I was a boxer in college, I actually grew up and loved to fight, if you will. And there's definitely times in which you may have to fight, in a sense. Like, you should be able to handle and defend yourself, right? Like, I get in a sense that it's necessary sometimes, or you should be able to handle yourself. I am all for example, putting, like putting boys in boxing, or teaching, little girls self-defense and things of nature. I'm completely for that. If you, in a sense, at the all right, let's see. I'm gonna note here real quick. All right, cool. So I am for teaching your children, in a sense, how to handle themselves, because one day they may have to, in a sense, act in self-defense. However, I am not willing or supportive of us hyping up young children as we put them in a situation for comedy. If we put them in a situation for comedy in which they're asked to knuckle up on our behalf, and it's just a joke. While again, it's just a joke. Is people the idea of us promoting that to young children is almost, to me, it's almost like no surprise that this challenge came about in our community. And it led me to where I wanted to go with the bigger discussion. I want to share a video that just so happened to come to me. Anytime I'm doing a show, something happens as I'm preparing for a show that fits the show. And I got tagged in this post just literally a couple of hours ago before this show, and I wanted to kind of go deeper with it. So move past the funny TikTok of asking our kids to do, which I think is relatively immature. That's just my opinion. You can definitely jump on if you have a different opinion, but I wanted to go into the deeper discussion about, in a sense, quite often what leads to violence in our community. Again, I'm not saying this TikTok is going to lead to violence. I'm just talking about the idea of how we, as a culture, if you will, can be emotional to the point that it leads to violence. And we actually see it as normalized, and quite often understand why somebody may, feel disrespected and need to fight. Right. So that, disrespect is a big issue, as it should be, but our way of handling it, in my opinion, in the culture, quite often, especially when we're young, can be to resort to physical violence. And it's basically, you're given props in the community for years for being able to do that. And so even as adults, sometimes it becomes hard to calm that down, and we still have incidents outside of self-defense where we still may think an ass whooping is something that should be done even on jobs sometimes, right? And so I wanted to speak to that deeper seated issue in the culture, if you will, and share this post that happened to come to me just a couple of hours ago, and see what y'all thought. So again, hit the link if you want to jump in with me. I saw some people jump on and jump off. With that said, let me share the screen. Sharing the screen right now. All right. Watch this quick video real quick. Let me see here. Make sure I'm doing this right. I think I'm doing this right. All right, here we go.
You have to learn how to control your emotions. You got to. We got a lot of pride, and pride don't really do nothing. It's really nothing, for real, for real. Emotions is, guess what though? I'm gonna say something real. You know how many motherfuckers in jail right now off of their emotions? You know how many people killed that's dead because of their emotions? We gotta learn how to control our emotions. We gotta learn how to take at least 24 hours, at least a couple hours. Take a couple hours, because guess what? The emotions, they come and go. You might feel like that now, but I bet you, I guarantee you, 5 to 12 hours, you're not going to feel like that. And guess what? You just saved your life. You just saved your life. For real.
All right, let me stop sharing the screen. I love that post. Again, it was just sent to me a couple of hours before I did this. Before it was sent to me a couple of hours before I did this actual broadcast, and I love that post. Again, I just wanted to talk to the deeper level. This is all, if you just now started watching, sparked from what I would consider relatively the silly challenge of getting the kid to put on their shoes and go fight with their parents. While we might find that entertaining, unfortunately, I am not 100% surprised that that's a challenge that's floating around in our community due to our willingness to resort to physical violence. And to be clear, if you just now started watching, I'm not saying the TikToks are leading to physical violence. However, the challenge is a little immature because I think it is setting our kids up to show, even in a moment of fun, that as adults, we are willing to handle things with physical violence. But to the point of the video we just watched, where the young man says, hey, pride gets in the way, and we are so emotional that, as he said, do we know how many people are in jail because of their emotions? It made me think of Wallow from $1 Million Game. You know, if you know any about that, if you know about those guys, $1 Million Games, an amazing podcast, and Wallow is one of the co-hosts, and he spent 20 years in prison. And he talked about on that show a couple of times how when he put things in perspective, he had went to prison for like a robbery or whatever, and he said one day one of the other prisoners approached him and kind of asked him, hey, what are you in here for? And he explained that it was for a robbery and that kind of thing. And the guy said to him, how long did the robbery take or whatever? And I think Wallow said 5 minutes. And he says, you realize you're doing 20 years for 5 minutes? And Wallow said he had to sit with that because he realized not only was he doing 20 years for a 5-minute robbery that didn't lead to even a bunch of money that was worth 20 years, if you will. He says, but he realized that there were other people who were never getting out of the prison because of 5 minutes of emotion that had they calmed down, they could have made a different decision, and neither would they be sitting in that prison for longer than he had to be in there, or some for life. All because of a 5-minute cool down could have changed that moment. And so I just love highlighting and reiterating, because our goal here is to quote unquote raise the culture. And keep in mind, you can jump on here with me and give me your 3 cents. Please hit the link in the comments and join me. But I just want to keep in mind, as an attempt to raise the culture, make it make sense, that I see, and you can call it, you have to agree with me, but I unfortunately, let me see, I got some comments as well. But I see a correlation, if you will. Oh, what's up, Tamika? What's up, Rick Ross? I see a correlation, if you will, that we, in a sense, the ratchet stuff that we kind of have. Again, humans are capable of doing all things, but highlighting this aspect, to me, was worthy of talking of how emotions can be out of place and how we need that calming period. Like, for example, I'm a legal studies major, right? And so there's different degrees of murder, if you will. And so, of course, premeditated murder is considered murder one. And that's the type of murder, for example, that you can, go to jail for the longest. And so, but there's other levels of murder, and the one that can, for example, where if in a moment of in a heated moment, right? Let's say you walk in on your significant other you're married to, right? You walk in on your significant other and see them cheating, right? And in that moment, in your moment of rage, you pull out a gun, if you will, and shoot one or both of them, if you will, right? So if you do that in the moment, because when your emotions run high, our brains work such that our emotions and our logic do not operate in our brains at the same time. Some of you know that, but in the sense, in that heat of the moment, if you shoot and murder someone in that heat of the moment, you will not get murder one. If you walk in on there in that same room, see them cheating with your spouse, if you will, I'm gonna add the sister to the stream. If you see them cheating with your spouse and you get upset, walk outside to your car and come back in and shoot them, you will actually get murder one. Like, that's legally how that goes, because they literally consider that moment of walking outside the house to get the car is you're now thinking, have a moment to think about what you're going to do. Whereas in the heat of the moment, if you walk in, see it, and shoot in the moment, you possibly cannot get murder one. You're still going to get time. You're going to get another level of murder, but not premeditated murder one. And so I'm just highlighting that this brain function, if you will, is that even legally, they understand this psychological function of when your emotion, your logic is off. So in the heat of the moment, you may not receive murder one. So I highlight this extreme based on the video I just played to understand that is anytime you're being over emotional in a moment of conflict, it is imperative that we dialogue with our children about calming down before acting. Because here's the reality. We're out here and we know this as a culture. We're out here, in a sense, overly emotional, and we understand it because we have a lot of issues ourselves. So we understand it when we see it in others. Sometimes we understand it and get on the side of the emotion of the wrong action because we would feel the same thing in the moment, and we think acting in emotion is correct. But this is all the results of our culture, admittedly, not having intact families for you to learn how to act otherwise in a more appropriate manner, especially into your adult years. To a degree, without intact families now I would say for the last 40 to 50 years, I know this is a running theme that we keep going back to, but it's not me just simply saying, look at what we're doing. It's highlighting that, unfortunately, as a result of that, we now, as my man Bonds, the alchemist says, we're out here bleeding on one another quite often, and we can relate to the emotion to the extent that we trauma bond. Michelle, I know I'm saying a lot, Queen. I want to let you jump in here. I'm just kind of get this first thought out of here and let you jump in with me. But I'm
just listening. I don't got nothing to say.
Okay, no problem. Come off the mic if you want to speak. All right. So with that said, we're out here trauma bonding with one another to where we're out here understanding. And now, in my opinion, we can see a little silly TikTok where we're challenging our kids to go out here and, if you will, fight with us. And we're the adults pushing the kids to that challenge. And again, I said in the beginning, if you just jumped on, I'm all for teaching self-defense. I boxed in college. I love boxing. I used to love fighting even as a kid. However, I'll give you the game my grandfather gave me about this emotion. And this is the type of game that without, if you will, I would say a father figure, you may never get. So, for example, I remember one time I got into this one fight, and I'm from the country. So every day in the country, we used to go to the shade tree and play horseshoes, if you will. So again, I'm from a 3-stoplight town, pretty good horseshoe player in my day. I tell everybody in my town, I whoop anybody in my town in the game of horseshoes. Pretty good, whatever. But anyway, one day over a game of horseshoes, I forgot what got things started, but I got into it with this young dude. One of my partners, I think he was maybe a grade older than me or whatever. And so we were dialoguing, whatever the conflict was. And so if you got in trouble, if you got in trouble at the actual on the grounds of we call it free lunch. Some of y'all may know about the free lunch in whatever in the whatever, you go to the free lunch and you play games until the lunch come, everybody eat. So you got a free lunch every day and you play in the city, you played in your town or whatever. And so, but if you got in trouble on the grounds, you would get in a sense suspended for however long, from the free lunch, be able to come, if you will, whatever. And that's where everybody goes every day during the summer to have fun. So you wouldn't want to get suspended. So we were getting into it kind of relatively as it was over. But again, even once it was over, if it was found out you got in trouble, whatever. And so we were going back and forth, and people were kind of cognizant of, y'all don't want to have this fight here because you're going to get suspended. And so we get egged on, and we go up the street onto the school grounds. It's the summertime, so school's out. So we can't get caught on the school ground, if you will. And so end up getting in this fight or whatever. Initially, I was winning the fight, and then somebody broke the fight up. And when they broke the fight up, they egged us on again to fight, and I took an L when I fought again. So personally, what I put in my head is I ain't never let nobody break my fight up again, because I was whooping them right before the breakup. But then the second time he got the best of me, if you will, or whatever. So I go home. It's just my grandfather at home or whatever. So I gotta go home, and I took this L or whatever. And so I break down. My grandfather's asking what happened, whatever. And so my grandfather said one thing, and I took this to heart. And you're gonna see how it all fits into this emotional conversation. So I told my grandfather, I told him, hey, here's what happened. We started fighting over his ground, and we went to the school, and whatever. I was fighting him, and then I took the L. So it was hard to admit to my grandfather, because I was, like I said, I like to fight, and I usually win, right? And when I win, I don't come home and tell that I was even fighting, right? But this day, I came home, and I didn't have like a big mark on me or whatever, but I was just so distraught from losing the fight that it was obvious to my grandfather. I think I probably had extra dirt or something from wrestling in the ground with it, whatever. So like I was dirtier than usual or whatever. So I was sad and dirty. So I wasn't necessarily running home to volunteer to tell my grandfather, but clearly he could see his grandson. It was obvious, hey, something wrong. What's wrong, boy? Tell me what happened. And so I tell him I take the L, whatever. And so when I tell the whole story, my grandfather said one thing to me, and I took this to heart and never forgot it. He said, boy, I don't want to ever hear about you being in a situation in which you think you need to fight, and you leave where you're at and go somewhere else. You leave where you're at and go somewhere else. He said, I don't ever want to hear, don't you ever tell me that story again. If it's necessary, if it comes to that, it's on site, or it ain't necessary. I took that to heart. Because I understood the game. So what happened was my grandfather, understanding my neighborhood, which, we country boys at this time, this is back when people still fought, right? Before there was guns in play, if you will. And we were, I was a kid at this point, whatever. So my grandfather definitely understood that sometimes a boy gonna have to fight. But he was giving me the game that if you can stop and go somewhere else, then clearly whatever it is you think you fighting about ain't worth fighting over. And that's the game that he wanted me to understand. And that's what he gave me. And that's, in a sense, my grandfather's masculine game, breaking down when it's necessary and when it's not. And what he's speaking to without even saying it is the emotion that would drive me to fight. It clearly ain't there if I can step away. And he's also highlighting, let others influence me to get in a situation versus me on my own deciding this is a fight moment, not with the influence of anyone. And if it's necessary, do what you got to do. But in the moment that you have time to think about it, be much smarter, lose the emotion, and make a logical decision, because it makes no sense if you can take a break or let other people ag you on. You don't need to fight. I took that to heart. And I also never let nobody break me up again. The next time somebody tried to break me up, I hit them for trying to break us up, because we was already in the fight at that point. So again, I just thought that was just major gain for my grandfather. And I always highlight that story sometimes on the actual show, because I know had I come home to my mother, that's not the game she would have gave me. She would have been just more concerned about the fact that I even got in a fight and why was I fighting, and it ain't never, for her it would have been, it ain't no reason to ever fight or whatever. And so my grandfather wasn't gonna make the mistake of telling me there's no reason to fight in a little town where sometimes you have to get down. And he understood that as a man. He wasn't going to make the mistake of saying there's never a moment in which you fight. Had I went to my mother and if she had had to clean me up first, she would have just berated me for fighting, period. Right? He gave me the game and says, hey, if you got a calming period, without saying that, right? If you have a calming period, it is not necessary, and don't let your ego get you into a physical situation. And in the moment that you have to, because the moment is pending, do what you got to do. That's how I took that lesson from my grandfather. And I know many of friends, had they had their game, situations would have been different. I've seen people get hurt with sticks, bones broken, and things of that nature, all due to the whole neighborhood agging on situations that had they had my grandfather's game, they wouldn't have let those other people influence them. So just wanted to kind of throw that out. Michelle, you got something you want to jump in on that?
I just got a question. I don't know what the original topic was, but I got a question. If your mother would have told you the same thing that your grandfather would have told you, do you think that you would have took it the same way?
Yeah, it's definitely worth exploring. It's definitely worth exploring. She would, but here's my but. I think she absolutely could. So I'm not saying no, she can't. I will, but what's in my mind is she doesn't know to give me that game.
Yeah, true. I'm just, and I wasn't looking for any particular answer.
No. I'm just kind of digging through it. So the answer is yes, because obviously in an emotional moment where you done, took an L, at this point you're seeking comfort, and you probably got to listen to what the adults are saying in that moment, because you're worried about are you going to be in trouble? I'm just kind of getting the mind of a child. Are you going to be in trouble for this? So my grandfather handed it, as he's cleaning me up, also giving me the game. Boy, don't you ever leave one location. So I don't want to ever hear again of you leaving a location. Because what he's telling me is, if you got to fight, win, lose, or draw, I got you if that's what you got to do. But if you got time to leave here and go there, then, without him saying you don't need to fight, because he didn't say those words, I got the message. So yes, very fair question. As a mother, you can absolutely give that game, because that's what we do this dialogue for, right?
But the thing is, what the question was, would you have listened and taken it the same way?
Yeah,
because what I found is that boys don't often listen to their mother's voice, because it's the only voice they heard for 9 months, and then all you get is to clean your room and do this and do that and do this. And so what I'm finding with a lot of the young men around me, now that I'm around more boys, is that the moms will say something like, yeah, okay, da da da, but then the dad will say the exact same thing.
It happens a lot.
And all of a sudden it's gospel.
No, absolutely. And there's psychology behind that. You're kind of speaking to it. I don't remember the exact term or whatever, but it's something about some term with proximity or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's almost, it can, and I almost, believe it or not, can work in reverse, because just from the standpoint, it's like the parent you're around the most, kind of what you said, there's a psychology to hearing that voice all the time. And then the other parent who, in a lot of cases might be the man, whatever, if he's, whatever. So the parent, so what happens is a child, in their own curiosity, because they have to learn the world too, right? They're going to test their own boundaries. So in order to do that, that's going to happen with the parent they're with the most, which in most cases than not is the woman, right? So they're going to test their boundaries, even with the rules, with the parent that they're with the most, because there has to be time for them to test their boundaries. The parent they're going to do it the less with is the other one that's not there as much, is what I understand from the psychology, simply because, hey, I got a short moment with this parent, and if in this case, if it's the father, then they're always kind of trying to be on their best behavior because they're like relishing the moment with the parent they don't get as much time with.
And then what I'm finding along those lines is gender tribalism, right? And so boys, especially when they get to a certain age, boys in general, they'll just listen to their father more. They might not listen as far as follow instructions, but they hear them more. So they'll take it to heart, right?
Absolutely.
And so even grown men that I've known and dated and everything else, it's like a woman will tell them something, right? Even like in corporate America, a woman will say something, but it's not heard or taken to heart until another man says it.
Yeah, that's
and so that's where that kind of prompted that question. I wasn't looking or baiting or anything. I just wanted to know.
I didn't feel that way. No, I was just, just my way of working through it. And I love it because I would offer the emotional. This is what I started out talking about. I'm going to move to something else here in a second. But I was just kind of highlighting this because just to give you, let me see here. Let me see what I got a comment. Let me finish this comment, and I'll say this comment. And so what I love about what you're saying is I think the level of emotion that we see out here in the culture today is due to not enough, if you will, masculine fatherhood being there previous. And so now we're seeing more emotionalism from boys and girls due to a lack of what you just talked about. So I definitely agree with you, and I would attribute it some to now having a few generations of having more and more broken homes as why we're seeing the emotions. Let me see what Jen Dye in here real quick. She says, uncontrolled emotions are because we have triggers we haven't been taught how to evolve from. Triggers are old pain we're holding on to just in case it shows up again. We put on the safety until the familiarity of the hurt, disappointment, anger, etc. Then the safety is off the trigger. Just in case you're coming for me, as I remember happened before. They still exist because we haven't grieved the old situation, the unexpressed pain and hurt the soul has experienced. Holding on to that pain makes it grow, and hope makes it grow. And I can't see after that part. Excellent point, Jendaya. Excellent point. Absolutely right why this is happening. And I would offer, I said this a little earlier, I don't know if you were on when I said this, Michelle, but I would offer that to a degree, our entire culture, and I'm speaking about Black people specifically, is living out extended adolescence, experiencing exactly what Jendai is speaking to. Go ahead, Queen.
Can I add flavor to that sentence?
Please do. Please do.
Okay, I think as we progress through generations, that it's more than a trigger, right? It is acceptability. And so I'm a millennial, but I was raised Generation X because I was raised by my grandmother and aunt, right? And so there were certain things that we weren't allowed to do, like go outside in pajamas. There were certain things we weren't allowed to say. Half the stuff these kids get away with saying, I wouldn't have no teeth. I would have all veneers because these kids can do and say what they want. And now that they're older and they have jobs and everything else, even some people in my generation, late 80s as well, it's just like now we have trigger warnings on everything, right? And so it's not about the triggers themselves or even unhealed emotions. Yes, that's key. That has an effect, but it is what was allowed in society, and even as far as masculinity in the manosphere, if I want to use that term right now, it's just not the same standards, and it's not the same accountability for men, women, nothing. So all these extracurricular and socialized social media recordings of people misbehaving and getting rewarded for it, essentially, I think that has a lot to do with it, more so than us being unhealed It plays Jesus, I can't even talk anymore. It plays a point, a position. I don't know what I'm trying to say. That saying right there, but I think that bad behavior is more acceptable because there's just no consequence from men or women.
So I would offer that what you're saying has some merit to it. I would just say I would still offer that you have it backwards, and
Mhm.
just from this standpoint. So yeah, I understand to a degree what you're saying, that we're definitely with the social media age now. This stuff is being rewarded, so we're seeing more of it, especially on social media. So I definitely understand what you're saying there, but I
Mhm.
still would offer that it is a result of just some aspects of not just being able to see via example of, in a sense, how to carry yourself, especially as boys. As I played that, I don't know if you saw that video I played with that young man saying, hey, our pride and emotions can make us end up in jail. And so where that's happening for a lot of young boys, I will still offer them not having manhood modeled
Mhm.
is a bigger issue than even, like what I'm saying is, it's like what you're talking about is the results of what started it, and now that the results are what they are, you're highlighting why it exasperates, if that makes sense. So I would just kind of say that you're correct, but I disagree that that's more of a culprit. That's more of a corporate culprit as it's happening currently. But the reason for it is a number of years of the same hurt that I think Jedi is speaking to, in my opinion. You don't
Okay.
have to agree, but I would feel like the unhealed triggers, because what happened, let me throw this out as an example of what I mean. So what
All right.
happens is, when we watch something on social media, not everybody, but a lot of times there can be an emotional response that some people will literally get behind and agree with, because they understand an emotional trigger. If you don't have that emotional trigger, and your emotions are not how, if you heard me when I was talking about how your emotions and logic cannot work in your brain at the same time,
Mhm.
that's just a condition of the human brain. And so if you're a person watching something and saying, why are they acting that way? And we're saying, well, hey, look at all the people cheering them on. Where the people are cheering them on is typically because they understand the trigger.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? So they're not able to look at it from the logical space, because you're not triggered by this thing that's causing them to act out, whether it's acting violence, acting, yelling at someone. And you're saying, I would never handle it that way, or I would never handle it that way in front of my children. Why is he or she acting that way in front of their children? But there's a group who's saying, I get it, do what you're doing. That group is, to Jedi's point, the hurt, who unhealed, triggered group, who just think
Mhm.
it's okay to be that emotional. They've never seen an example. So what happens is, I don't look down upon it because I get it. I just think now that we don't have the modeled example, the only way to address it, in my opinion, is, for example, I don't know if you heard me earlier in the show, I said of Terry Simmons, who simply put out a post for that, and that's an amazing brother, who simply said, hey, put on your shoes challenge stops now per management. I love him just putting it out, because he knows it would have an effect on some of those who follow him.
Mhm.
And that's because he knows there are people who look up to him as a man, if that makes sense. And so it's almost like he's playing a symbiotic role for those who will listen. Clearly, there'll be people like, who the hell he think he is,
Yeah.
telling people to stop. However, he knows it will have some impact on those who respect how he carries himself amongst his tribe. And so I like when I see people, in my opinion, attempt to raise the culture. I
Mhm.
wanted to highlight that today, when it came to what I consider a silly TikTok. We will reduce it to, oh, it's just entertainment and it's just fun. And I'm saying that silly TikTok exists because of our unhealed triggers. And we think it's okay to have fun in that manner, which also sets our children up to think it's okay to act in physical violence. Again, I don't want to overstate a simple TikTok in fun, but I'm not surprised to see it within our culture, and I find it distasteful. What do you think of that TikTok? And then we'll move on to another subject.
I actually don't know. I feel old right now. I don't even know what TikTok you're talking about. But I did want to touch on the gentleman you had not even him, because I don't even know who he is either.
Right.
But Ricky Smiley specifically, I think it was like this time last year, there was a big fallout with him and his family mostly, and then because whatever. So he had a nephew or something along those lines, and the nephew was having a hard time, whatever. And so Ricky Smiley set him up for a job, but he said you got to cut your hair because he had long dreads, and he had just got out of jail or whatever. He said you got to cut your hair. It was a whole blowout because Ricky Smiley told his nephew that in order to get this job, you need to cut your hair. A few weeks after that, or maybe a month or two after that, the nephew winds up dying because he OD'd or whatever, right?
Oh man.
Because he didn't take the job because he didn't want to cut his hair. And Ricky Smiley's point, and whether I agree or disagree is not that right now, but Ricky Smiley's point was that these boys are growing up without men. And when men try to help and step in and say, no, you need to wear a suit, you need to do this, you need to do it for whatever job you're trying to do, then women attack the men that are trying to help. And that's why men don't help anymore. Now, I think that's a interesting rabbit hole if you wanted to go down that way. But since Ricky Smiley said that, and yes, I'm still a mother, and yes, my child is still in first grade now, but I have been less vocal and more reluctant to step in when there's a man that I know that's not going to hurt my child in any way, shape, or form. You know what I mean? Like, you're not going to hurt him, right? And sometimes he be wilding and he needs to be disciplined. And and if you got to run up the stairs like 4 or 5 times, then you got to run up the stairs 4 or 5 times because you in this man's house messing up his stuff. You know what I mean? But like prior to that, I don't think that I would have been, so gung-ho about allowing other men to step in.
Right.
Same thing with football. He's still not doing football, but like now I'm open to like soccer or baseball or something, right? Because it's like he does need that man presence, and I'm not going to be the one to stop it. But I know that's controversial. There's a lot of folks out there that disagree with me. But I think the Ricky Smiley plus the gentleman you were talking about who was like, look, we ain't doing this no more. This is how men conduct themselves. This was a joke or whatever. I think that women, especially single parent women, need to be more open to that. Now, I ain't saying let your boyfriend come in and abuse them and do all this other. I ain't saying that. I'm just talking about, like, hey, son, you got to pull up your pants. Bill Cosby said that at one point before the scandal, and it was a whole blowout. Monique tried to step in as auntie, and she was like, stop wearing bonnets at the airport, and it was a whole blowout about that. So it's like we as a culture, we aren't community parents anymore, where some of us, I got that 20-foot radius. If there's a child in 20 feet of me, they my child. That's how I operate. If my kid got cupcakes, your kid gonna have cupcakes. If my kid need a smack in the back of the head, your kid might get a smack in the back of the head if you're not doing it. You know what I mean? So it's like me and my friend group, we still have that mentality because we are the tribe. But as a community, I don't think that we have that. If you do something down the block and Miss Carol see you, Miss Carol gonna whoop you, and by the time you get home, you're gonna get whooped too.
Right.
You know what I mean?
So let me throw this out as a dialogue, and I've learned this the hard way. And there's better ways to do it than even the whoopings, if you will. And I don't think I want to dive down that path because I want to go on.
Yeah, that's a whole rabbit hole.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And I've learned. I used to be an advocate. I'm no longer an advocate with all the therapists that I've had come on and talk about. So I just wanted to at least throw that out because they, people know on Mental Dialogue we challenge you, but I just don't want to, start a whole nother subject on that. But what I do love is you talk about, that example was your revelation, in it, because here's what I always understand. And so I always like to be super empathetic and understanding of what we're seeing. And I think sometimes we miss this boat. And this is why sometimes people won't receive, in a sense, the provision, if you will. It's because people feel attacked when you're pointing out. Sometimes they feel attacked. It's almost like, what are you saying? Am I not parenting well enough? And I also get like just using you as an example as a single mother, and per your nature to a degree, your nature to nurture. So it makes sense that if you're doing it on your own, like even if you were doing it with someone, it's still in your nature to be overprotective, right? And with a husband, if you will, then there's the balance that you and your husband both can have for your children or your child. But when it's you just alone and you don't know who to, in a sense, give that provision, it is by your nature to say, I got this, like you said, before you've seen the examples of why you might want to give that provision. And you said it exactly right. It's exactly right from this standpoint. Absolutely find the men who, as you said beautifully, if you know this man ain't trying to harm your child, then give that leeway, because he is lending a voice that you can't lend, as you said, even if you say the same thing. And so again, that's the first determination. Is my child safe under the provision of, and especially if it's in your presence? Why jump in with a man who you know is not trying to harm your child, even though it is your nature to be protective? Because we always talk about the idea of the village, and the reality is a lot of us don't have the village no more. Love to hear the fact that you've created one for yourself, and people, please, if you can, find a village where, as you said, all of these children are ours. That's the concept of our ancestors. That's what they come from. We're in a society now that unfortunately does not respect and understand that concept, if you will. So I got somebody here. I don't know how I need to block them. All right, here we go.
Oh, they sharing nasty stuff.
Yeah.
No, I mean, even at that 20-foot radius, if I'm at like the mall or something, and there's a baby about to jump out of what was the little chair things? It's like, watch your child. But it's like, no, like wherever I go, that 20-foot radius is just me. Period. Now, whether they agree or not,
Right.
it depends. Yeah, and like the white babies, I kind of leave the white babies alone because they just need to learn and be crazy, But for us, especially us, it's like, if your baby's playing with a light socket, I'm not gonna let the baby play with a light socket.
Don't let none of them babies play with a light socket. Don't get into that. All these children are ours, and I'm pointing this out for a reason, because I like to be very careful that even we've talked about this very deeply, and I'm going to move on to another subject, that even in our discipline, some of it comes from a hurt triggered place as well. And sometimes we can over discipline to the point where we don't allow our children to have voices. So I want to be very careful in that we're highlighting that correction should be this or that, as the point of what I'm saying, as much as, again, the emotion that we're seeing in our culture where we're bleeding on each other comes from, unfortunately, a lot of us have not seen it modeled. And so I always like to point that out. And so if you could pick up seeds from this conversation about finding, these significant other people that you can put in your children's lives, or if you can think to have the right conversations with your teenager, that maybe you're so busy in your day, whether you're a single mother or a single father, right? Or even parents, if you're so busy in your day, make sure you're giving your children game on, like the guy the video said, give it 5 minutes, give it 24 hours before you make an emotional reaction, because typically your emotional reaction will be one that you regret. And the sooner we can teach our children that, even if they haven't had it modeled at home, if they didn't have lucky enough for me to, have a grandfather like mine to give me that game, if you're not that lucky, hopefully you could pick up a seed today and give it to your children. Let me play this other cut. I just wanted to play again. We just doing open dialogue. Anybody else watching, y'all can jump on with us as well. I'm going to play this cut.
So I want clarification on that last point. So we've got to schedule the whoopings. You're saying schedule the whoopings? Is that what you say? I'm messing with you. Go ahead.
No, that's all good. That's all good. Yeah, I've always been of the belief you don't necessarily take it off the table, if you will, but I've been moved to realize it's probably a smarter way as parents that we can handle that situation. Because ultimately, and matter of fact, I'll recall something that one of the therapists said most recently when we were having this conversation, and I'll say this and get off this point. And I hope I can paraphrase her correctly. But Marilyn O'Dweeney, she's a cognitive behavior therapist, and she's always clear. We do mental health events via Zoom as well. So on our last community checkup, I think it was our last one or the one before last, and she mentioned the idea, because we were talking about inner childhood wounds and even how we're parenting our children. And she was saying that we have a bad concept in our culture about what discipline is. We think of discipline as correction of our children, whereas what we should be teaching our children is the discipline for them to self-discipline themselves. So you correct in order for them to cognitively make smarter decisions. And so they decide not to do what we don't want them to do versus just simply punishing. Punishing doesn't work as effective as teaching them to have the self-discipline to do what you want. That's what we should be. It should be used for that versus like correction versus punishment, if that makes sense. So
I'm a data governance engineer by trade, but I have a bachelor's degree in behavior analysis, so cognitive behavior, whatever. And so on paper, all that's real nice. But for real though, I keep talking about whoopings because I talk a lot about whoopings, but my child has only really got one good Kunta Kinte, I'm gonna beat you around this house whooping.
You probably don't want to say that on social media these days.
No, it's fine. It's okay. I live in Georgia. As long as you don't leave no marks, you good, right? So he only had one good whooping. And from then on, he's been okay because we have other steps in place, and he knows when he makes mistakes and stuff like that. So it's good on paper, like this gentle parenting crap.
Yeah, well, I would say that these therapists are not coming from a gentle parenting perspective. Just to save face, they're not here to defend themselves, if you will. All right, let me play this other cut, and this is going to take us in a totally different direction. Again, this is what we do. We jump on once a week, do videos. You can jump on and join us and talk about any topics y'all want to talk about. It's just hard conversations on race, sex, and culture. I'm going to play this cut. I wanted to play it on Saturday's show. We did a show on, what was the show? It will slip my mind right now. I can't remember the name of the show now from Saturday on Mental Dialogue. But anyway, let me play this, share the screen, and we're going to change the whole subject and talk about this cut right here. All right, I'm sharing right now. All right, here we go. It's a 3-minute cut, but it's quite enjoyable, I think.
Running on and running around with the fake narrative because it makes them feel better. They don't feel as good just being a sub-Saharan African. They have to implement everybody else's history. The ancient Egyptians, the Moors, the Native Americans, they have to steal all these other people's history to feel good. Because why? Let me tell you why. Let me tell you why. Hold on, family. It just came to me. Let me tell you why. Because of what this doctor says, Dr. Clarence Walker always say. What did he say? And he's talking about Afrocentrics here. Let me read it for you. The scholars who call themselves Afrocentrics have not written history in the strictest sense of the term. What they have produced is a therapeutic mythology designed to restore the self-esteem of Black Americans by creating a past that never was. So when the elders back in the day used to kick this history and talk this shit, they were trying to help you with your self-esteem and make you feel better. And they created a history that never existed. So for decades, they put together and compiled shit that sounds good. And that's why you niggas think you have something to do with ancient Egypt or Nubia. Because what? Let me read it again. The scholars who call themselves Afrocentrics have not written history in the strictest sense of the term. What they have produced is a therapeutic mythology designed to restore the self-esteem of Black Americans by creating a past that never was. You niggas.
Did you get a chance to look at that, Queen?
The video of the man?
Yeah. I mean, I know I just shared it, but I know I shared it with you sooner than
I got through like 10 minutes of it, and then I got stuck working.
Okay,
But yeah. I mean, he might be right, but it doesn't make me feel good. So it's like I don't want to listen to it. So, but no, like I don't understand the point of the history is false because those things did happen. But if he's saying that those things did not happen in connection with us, then that's something else too. And I don't remember if his standpoint was they came before Columbus standpoint or not. But I would need to dive. I would need to actually watch the whole thing. Might as well be like, oh, this man doesn't make me feel good about myself today.
Right.
I am a queen. What are you talking about?
I can dig it. So let's talk about that. You know what I mean? Again, we're just having dialogue. So yeah, it's more of he's digging into that, though, you know, that group is not connected to us in particular. And so Chief X, I highly recommend people follow his page because he will challenge some of the paradigms that we have. It's not I'm not recommending you follow it because I'm telling you to agree with the man. But if you're, familiar with our platform, we like to challenge thought processes and beliefs as well. And so I like this challenge. And I will admit, I like it because having studied the history, I know that most of what he's saying is accurate, right? And for me, it's not just simply whether the history is accurate. It's dialoguing and coming to understand. What I would challenge is how history is properly used. If you think about what we're talking about now, this builds on a dialogue we had a few other weeks on this very broadcast, right? And so you recall that when we had Emil was jumping on with us, and I was kind of, in a sense, challenging him and you to a degree about understanding how history is properly used. And for me, the reason that conversation matters so much is because I would offer that when we come to understand how to use history properly, it can better serve us to act today. Like, people always say, if you don't understand history, you're bound to repeat the mistakes of history, or whatever that quote is, or whatever.
Yeah.
So while that sounds good, his story is always used in a manner to progress the group. And what happens is, due to, unfortunately, the transatlantic enslavement trade, our unfortunate detachment to who we actually were, which is not easily to go back and track now that what happened. So in our loss of our lineage, then unfortunately, I would agree with Chief X that a lot of our even Black scholars of the past, I don't offer that they were necessarily intentionally trying to harm us, but I agree with the quote that he got from that one doctor saying, hey, they didn't use in a sense, a strict form of history in order to tell a history that is true. And it was used to psychologically try to help our community. And so for me, this ain't a point about whether they were right or wrong or not. It's coming to understand how to properly use history. And if you attach your lineage to who you're not, I'm not sure that it can be as helpful as we think it could be, if that makes sense.
Okay.
I'll jump in and jump in and give me some thoughts on that.
No, I agree. I don't think any logical reasoned person is going to be like, I am 100% descendant from ancient Egyptians or Spanish Moors. I don't think that logical people are thinking that. I know about the Moors. I know about Kemet. I know about all the warrior tribes. Ironically enough, I don't know anything about pre-colonial Nigeria or Liberia, except for the CIA thing that happened in Liberia. That was crazy. But minus that, I only know about ancient civilizations, and I never said that I am a, I never thought that I'm a direct descendant from like Pharaoh Khufu. I don't think that. And I don't think other people think that. I hope other people don't think that. Do they think that?
So there's a lot of dialogues of. Here's the bigger thing, though. It's not even about if people think that as much as the cultural, I would say, misappropriation of,
Okay.
for example, when you come into consciousness and you go seek symbols,
Oh, okay, yeah.
right? When you
And
see
then
that,
the first thing you find is like black people in Egypt. Okay, yeah. I mean that makes sense, but that's like the easiest thing to grab because it wasn't indeed the pacifier. But you'll eventually start to research your own self if that's your consciousness. But you know what? You're right because there's a lot of Hotep heroes out there. Because I'm about to say something else. There's a lot of Hotep heroes out there. Now that I think about it, so I never really sat down and thought about their logic about what they think. And I know people call themselves Moors as well. But I didn't think that they were like serious. I thought they were like studying sacred geometry and stuff.
so they are serious. But for me, it's not about the individuals doing that and their logic as much as the psychology and understanding the importance of why that can happen. So the psychology is without the attachment of who we are, then unfortunately we are capable of latching on to any and
Mhm.
everything. I made that mistake before in my past.
I mean,
Right?
well, we all have as youths, but
So okay, so hold on. So let's dialogue. Yeah,
you
so
got to block that person on YouTube again.
yeah, I keep doing it. Unfortunately, I keep jumping on.
Okay.
So so um yeah, lost my train of thought. Oh, yeah, I already done it. Yeah, but here it is. It's the psychology of how we've all done it or why we've all done it. So
Mhm.
that's the nuance, not about their individual's logic, about who's right or wrong. It's becoming aware of how, because of our experience, our willingness to latch on to incorrect history, claim it as our own, and do it in a way, in my opinion, that can stagnate us. Because without a direct understanding of passed down history, which all groups do around the world, right? They pass down some version of history. And if you
Mhm.
recall from a couple of weeks ago, his story is used by all nations and all groups to effectively pour in enough esteem to their direct lineage to, in a sense, fight for this land, fight for this culture, fight for this region. That's how history is used. And when you understand that it is his story, then you understand why all groups highlight their most prevalent history to say, hey, this is the um, cloth that you come from, if you will, right?
Mhm.
So you just give enough of that history to ensure that in the event that you are attacked as a region, as a culture, you will defend it because you have enough pride in it. So once you understand how history is used, and then we learn through example from what Chief X said, that in a sense it was used mostly as in a sense only an esteem boost, even though it's not our history, then that's not, in my opinion, an effective use in order for you to stake your space where you're at and do the best you can,
Uh-huh.
because that's what history is used for. That's why, as we talked about on this broadcast a few weeks ago, while we can be sometimes can be upset about, well, what exact history are they teaching in the schools? Why aren't they teaching the worst of it? Remember, we were kind of having that dialogue,
Yeah.
and I was saying, hey, um, you know, and to reiterate, I am not a fan of what's happening with this concept of critical race theory being misappropriated and misused in a sense to rid our schools of Black history, if you will. So let me say that first and foremost. However, if you remember, my challenge to even you and Emil was understand it wouldn't be just the goal of to say how bad things were, because that's not how you use history, right?
Mm-hmm.
Remember, I said I would love for the Black history to be included in the way that Carter G. Woodson wanted to be included, which is to highlight, if you will, these amazing places that Black African Americans, if you will, have the role they've played in building this country. Because the reality is, without you supplementing your son's education the way that we already know you are, we know, you and I both know, most Black children are not getting that. And so if they're left to, if you will, the public school alone, then they will went through 12 years rarely seeing example of themselves. So they're missing a very vital part of how to navigate the world without that. So I just use Chief X, if you will, his example of breaking down, hey, get to Western Africa, Western and Central Africa, which is more than likely where we're from. If you're going to teach any history prior to us being here, you might want to learn the immediate history and figure out what that looks like. And again, just take out enough to make your child see themselves, understand, hey, this is what you come from. You have the appropriate amount of, if you will, esteem. You love your child and navigate to say, emulate this excellence.
Mm-hmm.
Like that becomes the most important aspect of his story, right? Versus focusing on the worst of what was done to us, and that being what you input into your children. Like that is a mistake that I think we all can make. And so the reasons we end up finding out about Egypt, and even I, I've talked about this, even I call us kings and queens, not for the reasons that we were kings and queens, because even the reality of Egypt, there's only one king and only one queen at any given time. The majority of people were far from that. But just even us latching to say, hey, they told us this one set of story and we were kings or queens, like that emotional, logical leap makes sense based on the version of history we learn here. And overcorrection is what I would call what we've done when we jump to Egypt, when we jump to these places where, in my opinion, that are not our direct lineage. We make an overcorrection that still leaves us often as stagnant as the history we will learn through public school education. Go ahead.
Well, it's complicated, right? Because those places were chosen for a reason, right? So Egypt only. I'm not going to talk about the Spanish Wars, but like having a dead civilization to point to is maybe psychologically easier than saying I'm going back to Nigeria right now because that's the only country that's highlighted in my Africa map right now. Knowing that there's a country that didn't fight for us, a live country that didn't come back for us or nothing. They was like, all right, bye y'all. I mean, I know that that's not the case, but when you're younger, 19, 20, whatever, and you're starting to seek out the Blackness, I think psychologically it's easier to find a dead civilization to connect to instead of a live country with current events going on.
So, yeah, it may be easier. The dialogue today is about what's best for us.
True.
Not just, I'm not having a dialogue about why we do it. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So the dialogue,
but my whole thing is like most people, hopefully, if they really are seeking truth and not seeking that pacifier, will seek out their nation of origin, because like we're still disconnected from those people as far as like nationality, like culture is concerned. Probably less than what we think, because we still eat a lot of the same foods. We still do a lot of the same dances, which are weird when you see them do it. It's like, oh, we do that naturally. It's like it's a weird thing, but it's like we're so far removed and alienated to the point where I think you posed the question. I want to do a spoiler or whatever, but like Africans don't see themselves as us, and a lot of us don't see ourselves as African unless we throw American on it. And so it would be extremely helpful if we learned about pre-colonial Western and Central Africa, Congo, Senegal, whatever, right? But then even for ourselves personally, what country and what tribe, because there are no such things really as countries. White people came in and made that up. But even as far as like what tribe and region are we from, Africa's pretty big, and we were taught that Africans were dirty and hut people, so we know that that's not true, but
so watch this
it's
process.
harder.
Watch this. So we learned that that's not true.
Yes.
Right? So I want to, again, I'm just talking about the psychology of it. And what happens is there's rich history in this country that we help to build.
Yes.
That we struggle to own this country.
Agree.
So when you really understand what I'm talking about, we've created our own culture due to what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason we see ourselves as different, which we should see, when you romanticize it all, we try to say we're all the same and we all should be. However, we fail to understand, like even the construct of speaking of Africa was given to us by white supremacy, the concept itself. So what happens is, anybody watching this, if you close your eyes and you picture Italy, you can see a little boot for a country in your head, right? If you close your eyes and picture England, you can kind of possibly picture that part of the world, right? And realize that England is a part of Europe and France ain't that far from it, right? If you think of Japan, you can see it off the coast of a huge China. I got my eyes closed, imagining these things myself in real time. And I'm highlighting that if you speak of countries, 55, 56 countries in the continent of Africa, if you will, it is hard for most Americans to picture what they look like, I would say, outside of South Africa, partly due to it being, in a sense, at the bottom of the map and to a degree highlighted during the apartheid years. And so you may have a perspective of what South Africa looks like. Obviously, people can do a better job than just that, but I would offer the majority of us can see the continent, but can't see those countries. And I'm highlighting that psychology because that language was given to us. And so what happens is, nowhere else, and Chief X talked about this on his video, if you go deeper into the video, that if you go throughout the Asian continent, again, Africa's a continent, but if you were to go throughout the Asian continent, Cambodians are not going to see themselves as Japanese, and Japanese are not going to see themselves as Chinese, even though they're all Asians. And so this speaks to the reality of our experience, and there's misnomers in trying to connect it all versus, in my opinion, effectively learning to find your actual history, even in this country, if you will, highlight just enough of it, your best ancestors, show them to your children, because they're not going to see them in school, right? We are responsible. Like today, I forgot the lady's name, but today in 1885, the first Black woman in this country was given a patent, if you will. Go to urbanintellectuals.com to find out her name.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah. So
that should have been a Google picture or something. Google failed me today.
Right. So there's so many examples that we could, in a sense, tell our own story in this country, because at the end of the day, your children, how they're gonna, and think about this, not just Black children, think about anywhere in the world, for the people that are successful in their region, in their countries, they're probably doing it because they see, hey, I own this and I want to do the best I can in this area. And so that is the esteem that we need our Black children to have versus, I remember the Saturday show. Saturday show was, are Black people, do Black people wear struggle as a badge of honor? So that's what made me bring this up today, if that makes sense. So you see what I'm saying? So I'm trying to, in a sense, help us more, in my opinion, more appropriately view history in a way that is to our advantage versus focusing on the struggle to the degree that it does not progress our children and we don't take ownership of a country we absolutely help to build. And so that's the challenge, because I would say without understanding our lineage correctly and not realizing all of how we were involved, we fought in every war in this country except one. I think it was the War of 1812. None of us were involved in, if I remember the exact war. So we fought in every country, every war except 1812. We're very much a huge part of this country. And so that is a very different marching order for our children in taking ownership, because to a degree, when we play out our struggle in the way that we do, we go through what James Baldwin talk about is that difficult idea of consciousness, right? Where we struggle with, how we see this country and our attachment to it. And I'm more concerned about setting our children up to win. And one of the best ways to do that is do what already works all the way around the world. I'm just very aware of our unique history in this country. It makes it a little more difficult for us to use what everybody else uses.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. To that point though, and I'm not even disagreeing with you. I'm gonna highlight something.
Okay.
I think it was 2020, the year of 2020 or 2021. With I keep calling them Asians. I'm gonna say Chinese people specifically, right? So it was like Asian hate. It was a whole thing about Asian hate. And it was, I want to say, a handful of months before they had a law in place that said that you can't attack Asians because it's a hate crime. Whereas at that time, we had a anti-lynching bill on the floor for 150 years, right? And so the power of having that nationality and that national pride for China, as far as the Asian Americans are concerned, that played a benefit because it's a living, structured nation. And the reason why we don't mess with Japanese people the way we used to with internment camps, and the way that we don't mess with Chinese people the way that we were legally in 2019, 2020, is because there's a whole country that will stand up and be like, stop messing with our people. And that's why you go to Chinese school, and that's why you go to, for the Jewish kids, you go to synagogue school, and that's why you learn that nationality so that you fight for them and they fight for you. But if no one is fighting for us across the water, now what?
All right, so let me break down how the bill because again, the game's available to play, and they just chose the game that's available. So watch how this happens. So it's not a bunch of Chinese schools around the country. I'm not saying there are none or whatever. We obviously know the Jewish community, if they have their way to a degree, especially where they're numbered at, they will send their children to school until about the 8th grade before they let them go into public schools if they have their way, right, or whatever. And so we do understand that about the Jewish religious community, right? But so what happens is, this is a great example, actually. I'm glad you brought it up. So what happens is, how we love to talk about, Asians are about their economics. They don't get involved in politics, whatever, because
they're always involved in politics,
right? But I'm just saying, you've probably heard this dialogue. It's always incorrect, but I'm just bringing it up right now to make a point. So what happens is, here's the reality: in different areas around the country, they are not that involved. If you actually go look at different areas of the country where they are involved, is where they're aggregated, because it absolutely makes sense. Like if you go talk to various Asian groups or whatever, they will openly tell you to a degree they don't like to, in a sense, be out public by the nature of their culture, having those type of battles in a country where there are not a lot of them. So there are places where you will see very little Asian involvement. However, when you get a situation because of, in a sense, the COVID-19 virus being called the Chinese virus or whatever, and you start getting people attacking, in a sense, a particular group, well, or means that a group that is financially stable, if you will, as a collective in this country, if you will, then they are able to say, okay, if this is going on and the only reason you're doing it is because, we're Chinese, if you will, then they're able to put their money into politics, because this is how bills go. So if you are our senator, every bill we sign was more likely written by the people that want us to sign it in some form or fashion, if you will. So because it costs a lot of money to push a bill through. And so as much as, again, you correctly understand that they will mobilize and get involved in politics, they absolutely got involved and played a game that we might say, oh, they will never make a bill like that for us. But our reality is, and this is a reality I absolutely understand, our distrust for the system will typically is not having us put our money up in order to push bill throughs and pay for politicians. And I understand why we don't do that. But when you see that bill go through, we look at it as, hey, the country put a bill through for the Chinese Americans. They look at them as more important to us. No, those Chinese Americans paid the right people to write a bill and got the senators in their back pocket to push the bill. That's how the system works locally, statewide, and federally. They just played the game that was available. This country could care less about them being Chinese or not. Those politicians said, you gave me enough money, I'll sign the bill. That's the game that's played for most bills. This one just happens to be race related.
I will agree to an extent. I will agree to. And I'm going to leave that extent there. But
we're the place to do the extent. That's what we do these for.
Nah.
Jump to the extent.
No, because I don't have like quotes. I have like weird anecdotal things that are going on. And so, particularly with Japanese people, because there was an issue in the 90s, I want to say, or early 2000s. Had to be early 2000s because I was down here and I lived in Clarkston, which is like a refugee city. It's like one of the largest refugee places in like America. Mm-hmm. And so it was a whole thing, like the Somalians and Japanese and a few other people that came over here. The Japanese abruptly left, but the Somalians wound up staying in Clarkston. But anyway, it was a whole thing where their actual country itself was sponsoring and getting people involved and things like that. Right. And so other countries play heavy in our politics by having Asian American and I don't know about the Somalians and the Ethiopians, but I particularly know about the South Koreans that were coming over, the Vietnamese and the Japanese, and they had country sponsorships. And when they became of age in high school, they were expected to vote and sway in certain ways. And I don't want to get too in depth into that because my FBI agent be tripping. He be cutting off my phone and stuff. But it's just a whole thing where, as far as me and myself is concerned, I focus on Nigeria mostly because my son's father is Nigerian. Okay. And so I focus on Nigeria because I did the DNA test. They said I was like 70%. So I'm claiming. I don't care if they claim me or not, but I'm claiming. So we do a lot of pre-colonial history there. But for my neighbor down the block, they might be from Ghana. And now they got to learn Ghana history, you know what I mean? And even as far as having that Nigerian support, even for people from Liberia, I know I'm going down a weird sort of rabbit hole, whatever, but Liberia is still one of the largest slave exports in the world. And like, you would think, oh, how much is a slave in 2022? You'd be like, oh, it's a few $100,000.
Well, help me understand.
But no, it's what's going on here?
Help me understand. How are you focused on these other groups based on our dialogue today? I'm kind of, because there are other groups.
So as far as being a African American, I don't know where they stole me from, right?
Right.
The paper trail stops at a certain point.
So I'm highlighting. You don't need to know that from this standpoint. You are already here to play the game that's available.
True, but when we talk about co-opting other people's cultures and how it's a psychological pacifier, if I try to seek out my own culture and not co-op the Moors or not co-op the Kemites or whatever else, right? Or people in Mali, right? And I want to co-op Nigerian culture or Liberian culture or Congolese culture, then I learn about the current events because they're living cultures. And I learn about pre-colonial events because they're still living cultures. And it's like identifying as 3 or 4 different countries, because again, Africa's huge, is difficult.
Still talking in the, like, you shouldn't be saying Africa's huge. You understand what I'm saying? Like we're just so caught up in the context that this unfortunate transatlantic slave trade played on our psychological minds, right?
Yes.
And keep in mind, this is something that we always forget. This psychological game was played on all Americans.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll have dialogues amongst ourselves. Oh, your thought is coming from a white supremacy standpoint, right? Like white supremacy is, if you will, was taught to all Americans. Like we lose sight of that. Like nobody's born with it, right? And so right now, your struggle is this dialogue of needing to do so. And I'm just saying that not being shown ourselves, and then the natural, because we both talked about how easy it was. I did it myself. When you find out, oh, dang, all the history I learned wasn't true, then you naturally go seeking yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You then jump into the whole other end of the spectrum and adopt everybody, co-opt everybody that looks like you in order to say this is who you are, to feel pride, because there is a psychological esteem that you're not being given through public education. So it is quite understandable that we're doing. I'm challenging that idea of some people staying stuck there and learning to not speak on these other groups as if they're us, because they don't see us as us, and scientifically we no longer are them. There is this collective viewpoint that was given to us by a construct. That construct is not true.
Okay, so as far as history is concerned, pre-transatlantic slave trade, do we focus on any of that from your position?
So I would focus on what we did here first.
Of course.
And okay, we say of course, but we don't do it.
It's just like whatever. All right, I'll start there.
Right. So maybe you do. Maybe you do, but like, you know what I'm saying?
But like I didn't, at 18, 19, I was like, oh, all this stuff is a lie. And then I did the same thing you did. Right. And I'm learning about, the Moors and how they taught people how to bathe, you know?
Right. So we now make ourselves the masters of every group, populated every land, right? We become this all world thing. And here's where the psychological disconnect happens. So we resort to this old time but it doesn't connect to our current place. And that's how it's a huge mistake, because you got to remember how history is used appropriately. So when you have your lineage intact, then you tell your story to connect it to where you are today and says, hey, son, hey, daughter, here's why we are where we are today. Be proud of where you are now. So there is no connect to, we were kings and queens. We populated the world. And then because we see ourselves from a collective blackness and we look around the world and see plenty of blacks who we think we're connected to, right, not doing as well, or what happened through colonialism. So there's a mind fuck that happens by continuing to view things from that construct. And so it's becoming awake to that mind fuck in order to do it in a different manner. And the different manner is realizing there's heroes that you can easily look up in the information age. Start locally, where you're at, Find out who Fannie Lou Hamer is. Find out who a lot of these amazing business people are that we highlight on the show from time to time. Go to Urban Intellectuals and learn more of who you are here. And then if you like history enough to go further back, then do so at your leisure. But since we don't know that period, I am highlighting there is a risk, in my opinion, associated with jumping past that period, pre-colonial being brought here. There's a risk jumping completely past that period and claiming a bunch of other stuff. And so I'm not saying that the pre-colonial period is easy to find, but I am warning against becoming a bunch of who you are not. Does that make sense?
It does, and I've agreed with you from the beginning. But so who's this call to action for?
It's always been to drop the seed to parents to realize if you leave your Black child, to public school education, their history will not typically supplement them enough to navigate the world as if it is theirs. I think we all understand, in a sense, that public school education will offer to our counterpart that the world is theirs. And I would offer you have to supplement history in a way that makes them see the world as theirs too. So that call to action is waking up to the fact that to a degree, we subconsciously quite often know that some of these public schools are not serving our children. We're not always in position, based on our personal situation, to do anything about it. And I will continue to beat the drum on, and if you love your children, find a way to supplement the education for their history, even if you have to wait till the summer. Make an effort to do that and inundate them with who they were so that they have the proper esteem to see the world as theirs. That's all you got to equip them with: love and esteem, and that's the call to action. I hope that's a clear one.
It was. I was just making sure that the call to action wasn't for people who are trying to find themselves and wind it up.
Since okay, if it wasn't, let's not even do it. You see what I'm saying?
Okay, I was just making sure, because I was like, I don't know.
But you see what I'm saying? Like if you heard it and you get
I heard it.
So now let's not even bring the convoluted with that. If the one I said was clear.
All right. You good.
Feel me? You have anticipated it being something, but once you hear exactly what it is, and if it works, let's leave it right there and end the show tonight. How would you think?
I'm fine with that.
All right, sounds good. Appreciate you, Queen. Jumping on, helping me out.
All right, bye-bye.
All right, later. All right, y'all. Hope y'all enjoyed it. Share with others. Hope we made it make sense and raise the culture.